Pablo Escobar was the most successful drug dealer in the world. He was also its death spirit. During his 17-year rule at the top of Colombia's cocaine empire, he ordered the killing of thousands of people, including judges, parliamentary ministers, and presidential candidates. At the height of his power, he earned more than $1 million a day, but in the end he was forced to live as a fugitive in the Colombian jungle. Shot on the roof of the city he ruled, his fall from grace was epic. In this week's biography, we delve into the South American drug world to discover the real-life story of Don Pablo. Early life. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949 in the small town of Rinegro, 5 minutes from Medellin, Colombia. His father Abel was a hard-working, humble cattle breeder, while his mother Hermilda was a teacher. Pablo, the second of 7 children, grew up in a middle-class environment in a community fueled by the cocaine and marijuana trade. Although not all were directly involved in the drug trade, they all had a strong incentive to protect those who did. Violence, an integral part of drug trafficking enforcement, was everywhere. Before Pablo went to school, the family moved to Envigado, a small town near Medellin, so that Hermilda could start primary school there. Abel sold the farm and started working as a neighborhood watchman. Thanks to her school work, Hermilda soon became a popular and respected member of the community. At school, Pablo proved to be a bright and smart student. Although he tended to be chubby, love made him talented in all ball sports, and he especially loved soccer. Many of his teachers were involved in social causes, especially the battle for class equality, and had a strong influence on the boy. In his early teens, Pablo participated in street demonstrations and activities such as throwing stones at police officers. Pablo became part of a youth cultural movement called Nadaísmo, which encouraged young people to break the established order, obey their parents, and write their own rules. Part of this counterculture movement involved drug experimentation, which resulted in the 13-year-old future drug lord developing an addiction to marijuana that would never leave him. The young thug. By the time he was 16, Pablo had become a stocky and short young man, standing just over 5 feet, 6 inches. He had a round face and a small mustache. A few months before his 17th birthday, he dropped out of school, tired of the straight routine and wanting to make his own way in the world. Enterprising, Pablo started a small bicycle repair shop after graduation. He roamed the streets and the local junkyard looking for abandoned bike parts and then used them cheaply to repair bikes. With the money he received from this company, he bought himself a Lambretta motorcycle. Now, with a quick escape, he began to plan how to make money easier than fixing wheels for misery. According to legend, Pablo's foray into crime began when he stole tombstones from a local cemetery, sandblasted their names, and then resold them. Pablo decided that the way to make a quick buck was to rob businesses. He began measuring possible targets. He then rides his motorcycle to the target company, slides overhead and rushes into the company with a knife or gun, demands money, and then exits. All this happened in about 30 seconds. After a few successful robberies, Paul recruited his cousin to join him. One rides a bicycle and acted as a fugitive, while the other attacked the company. After a few months, Pablo got tired of it and moved on to bigger and easier things. He contacted a Renault car dealer, who would supply him with copies of the keys of the recently sold cars and the addresses of the buyers. Pablo only had to reach the addresses and drive the cars away. In his late teens, Pablo was caught stealing one of these cars. He spent several months in La Ladera prison, which was a positive life experience for him. Here he learned how to engage in a wider range of criminal activities, including kidnapping and drug trafficking. Violent reputation. Back on the street, Pablo and his cousin Gustavo went back to stealing cars. They collected stolen engine parts, which they gradually sold. The couple began building racing cars while Pablo competed in local events. Pablo and Garcia were not the only ones who stole cars in Medellin, which led to his continued activity. He owned several mansions, racing cars, helicopters, and airplanes constantly. He also decided to sell protection so that people would pay him to not have cars taken from them. Pablo was able to provide such a service because he had developed a reputation as an unpredictable and violent youth. When someone owed him money, Pablo hired a local thug to rob the person. He wanted them to ransom him for all he owed. He sometimes killed a person even when a ransom was paid, just to instill fear in the people he interacted with. Soon, Pablo decided to specialize in kidnappings for his own profit. Together with his cousin and future brother-in-law, he imprisoned a rich merchant named Diego Echeverria. Many of the poor workers in Medellin did not like this man who was fired by industrial workers like him. Although the family agreed to a $50,000 ransom, Echeverria was beaten, strangled, and thrown into a ditch. Although he had just committed a heinous crime, his chosen victim made Pablo extremely popular with the people of Medellin. In a strange way, they saw Pablo's murder as a blow to social equality. Starting the drug trade in 1971, 22-year-old Pablo began working for Medellin-based smuggler Alvaro Prieto. Under Prieto's leadership, Pablo engaged in a modest drug trade. Soon, however, he decided he wanted more money. He drove a stolen Renault to Ecuador and bought 5 kilograms of Peruvian cocaine paste. Having successfully passed several police and military checkpoints, he returned to Medellin, where he traded cocaine. Later, he contacted the Ochoa criminal brothers to arrange a sale to local cocaine boss Fabio Restrepo. The sale netted Pablo nearly $100,000, far exceeding anything he had previously earned, and put him firmly on the path to becoming a high-level drug dealer. Fabio Restrepo was murdered in 2 months. Suddenly, a new man took over Medellin's cocaine operation, Pablo Escobar. It was never definitively proven that Pablo murdered Restrepo, but everyone involved believed him. Most of the workers at Restrepo were upper-class dandies. They were afraid of Pablo and the merciless rascals with whom he surrounded himself. Shortly after rising to the top of the Medellin cocaine syndicate, Pablo married 15-year-old Maria Victoria Helena Vallejo. Now, 26 years old, he had a wife, wealth and power. It seemed like the sky was the limit. At its peak, cocaine smuggling from Panama through Colombia to the United States flourished in the late 1970s, and most of it was through Escobar's organization. Under Pablo's leadership, the cocaine industry was streamlined. He bought airplanes, including a Lear, to deliver drugs to the United States, where there was an inexhaustible supply of buyers. 2 months after the wedding, Pablo and 4 other people, who had returned from a drug run in Ecuador, were arrested. Narcotics police found 39 kilograms of cocaine hidden in the spare tire of his truck. That amount of coke would have resulted in Pablo being abandoned for a long time. His first tactic to get out of trouble was to bribe the court judge. However, the offer was firmly rejected. Pablo then had his team investigate the referee's background. They learned that he had a lawyer brother and the 2 men did not get along. A lawyer was contacted who was offered a huge sum to represent Pablo in the case. As suspected, the judge had to recuse himself due to a conflict of interest. The new judge did not have as much doubt as the first. He accepted the bribe and Pablo and his group went free. Colombia now had an enormous amount of money, and deposits in the country's 4 main banks doubled between 1976 and 1980. Pablo was able to use his millions to take over every phase of his operation, traveling to Bolivia and Peru, and Panama and buying all the farms and processing plants. He was also able to buy off the executive authorities of each country, developing a ruthless policy, which became known as plata o plomo, silver or lead. If the officials did not accept his bribe, they could expect death. By 1980, Pablo was at the peak of his power. With all the police on his payroll, he was the unofficial king of Medellin. He was not the only cocaine impresario in Colombia, but he was the most successful. Surrounded by bodyguards and gallows above, cocaine money transformed Medellin. One of Pablo's passions was football and now he could enjoy it. He paid to level and water the fields and install lights so he and his team could play at night. He also hired professional announcers to announce matches as if they were an FA Cup final. In 1979, Pablo built a luxurious country house on a 700-acre farm, 80 miles from Medellin, calling it Hacienda Los Naples. He brought exotic animals from all over the world to inhabit the farm, built 6 swimming pools and a huge mansion that could accommodate 100 guests. While he privately indulged in all his materialistic whims, Pablo began to worry about his public image. He consistently denied involvement in any illegal activity, presenting a formal, pleasant persona and appearing humble and polite. He consciously cultivated the image of a freedom fighter for the poor and positioned himself as an alternative to the establishment. He also poured millions of dollars into social construction programs. Between 1980 and 1982, Pablo did more to help the poor in Medellin than the Colombian government had ever done before. One of his most popular initiatives was a housing project called Barrio Pablo Escobar, which built houses and gave them to families who previously lived in shacks located in the city's landfills. This and many other projects made him easily the most popular citizen in Medellin. In his private life, Pablo behaved moderately. He was gentle and generally calm and relaxed with the people around him. He was enormously self-indulgent, with food, drink, and women. Once, when an official was found stealing from him, Pablo asked him to bring in front of him with his hands and feet tied, then kicked him into the pool, after which everyone watched as the man drowned. After his popularity among the masses was established and his control over the kingdom assured, politics was the next logical step for Pablo. His path to the legal profession began in 1978 when he was elected deputy councilor of Medellin. In 1980, he gave his personal and financial support to the establishment of a new national political movement, the Neoliberal Party. Then in 1982, he applied for and was elected to Congress, although as a substitute who participated in when the primary representative of Medellin was unavailable. The great advantage of being elected to Congress was that Pablo now had legal immunity, meaning that he could not be tried for a crime under Colombian law. The position also granted him a diplomatic visa, which he used periodically during his family's trips to the United States. During one trip, he bought an $8 million mansion in Miami Beach, Florida. Pablo now had political legitimacy with his enormous wealth. The next acquisition was a personal army. When a family friend was kidnapped by the M19 guerrillas, he formed a private militia to hunt down the rebels. Pablo's army was known as Death to Kidnappers. The increased visibility of Pablo due to his political position was the beginning of his fall. In Medellin, he was considered a Robin Hood figure, but when he tried to gain favor with polite Colombian society, he was rejected. They saw him for what he really was, a ruthless cocaine kingpin with no shame. When he arrived as a surrogate member of Congress for the first time on August 16, 1983, accompanied by a bodyguard, he was refused entry for the first time because he was not wearing a tie. He quickly grabbed one and swept into the crowded cell. He lay down on the designated spot and nervously bit his nails. Immediately, the president of the chamber stood up and demanded that all the bodyguards be removed from the cell. Pablo nodded and his thugs left the room. After a few minutes, the Minister of Justice, Rodrigo Lara, was on his feet. Defending the corruption case presented against her, Lara pointed her finger at Pablo and said, "We have a congressman who himself was born in a very poor region, very, very poor, and then emerges with smart business deals with bicycles and other things, huge wealth, 9 planes, 3 hangars at Medellin airport, and starts a Death to Kidnappers movement, while starts charities to try to bribe the poor and defenseless people. And there is an ongoing investigation into the criminal activities of Pablo Escobar in the United States, which I cannot tell you about in this house today." Pablo did not say anything in the parliament. When he left, he was surrounded by reporters. Freeing himself, he ran away. Through his lawyer, he informed Lara that if he did not provide evidence of his claims within 2 hours, he would face legal action. Lara agreed, and in the following days the newspapers were full of all kinds of revelations about Pablo's criminal activities. Pablo was now a persona non grata in political circles. He was expelled from the new Liberal Party and the American embassy revoked his diplomatic visa. The Catholic Church also refused to support him. The government even confiscated 85 exotic animals from Pablo's ranch, claiming that they entered the country illegally. Pablo's political career was now ruined. To make matters worse for Pablo, The Colombian government, at the instigation of Lara, quickly reached an extradition agreement with the United States to charge him in America for selling cocaine in that country. In May 1980, Attorney General Lara was shot 7 times while driving in a limousine. But Pablo had more powerful enemies. U.S. President Ronald Reagan announced a massive crackdown on the cocaine trade. After Lara's death, the Colombian government wanted to cooperate with American authorities to go after the narco leaders. Pablo was the greatest of them. The killing of Lara also turned a large part of the Colombian population against Pablo. With the act, he declared war on the country. The heat was too much for Pablo and he jumped over the ground and took a helicopter to Panama City. Although President Manuel Noriega offered them asylum in Panama last year, the authorities did not accept Pablo and his followers. After a few weeks in exile, Pablo was desperate to return home. He offered the Colombian government to go directly to and use his enormous influence to rid Colombia of the drug trade, provided he could keep his assets in Medellin and be exempt from arrest or extradition to the United States. Offer firmly rejected. When the Panamanian army attacked one of his laboratories at the Colombian border, he fled from Panama to Nicaragua. Meanwhile, he heard that his absence from Colombia weakened his control of the Medellin cartel. Kidnapping his 73-year-old father was a step too far. Pablo ordered all of Medellin to be killed. Dozens of suspected hijackers were shot down. Finally, the old man was released without ransom. Total war. In the middle of the massacre that followed the kidnapping of his father, Pablo returned to Colombia. He now decided to take the state with all he had. Around Medellin he was untouchable because he bought all the officials. This allowed him to move freely in the city, despite being the most wanted man in the country. Pablo's vindictiveness in the mid-80s focused directly on the judiciary, specifically on the judges who supported the extradition treaty with the United States. More than 30 judges were shot during that time. Then in November 1985, the M19 guerrilla group, paid by Pablo $1 million, attacked the courthouse and kidnapped the entire Supreme Court. They demand that the government abandon the extradition treaty. In the following siege, many people died. At the beginning of 1988, murders were reported almost daily. Martial law was declared to prevent the fall of the state. On August 18, 1989, Pablo's hit squads shot and killed both presidential candidate Luis Gala and the state police chief. Over the next 4 months, the Colombian government arrested more than 20 suspected drug lords and sent them to the United States for prosecution. A national police unit was sent to Medellin specifically to hunt down Pablo. During the first month, 30 of the 200 men were killed there. Paul escaped his government and caused great casualties, but he was constantly a man on the run. He always stayed one step ahead of his pursuers, but he was tired of the constant movement it required. Finally, he agreed to negotiate. Pablo agreed to stop violence, stop all crime and turn to. In return, he demanded preferential treatment in a prison of his choice and a reduced settlement. The government had already revoked the extradition treaty with the United States in the 1991 Constitution, so he did not have to worry about being sent to America. Pablo was arrested and convicted. He began his sentence in La Catedral prison in June 1991. But it was not any other prison on earth. It had a soccer field, a hot tub and a bar. The prison guards were all Pablo's employees. The prison cells were more like hotel suites, and Pablo and his fellow prisoners ate from chefs brought in from luxury restaurants. After a few months, official channels began to appear that Paul continued his criminal activities from La Catedral. This was a violation of the extradition treaty. He was arrested and transferred to a regular prison. Pablo's connections made him aware of the plan and he fled before the authorities could catch up with him. The hunt for fugitive Pablo was started again. But now American and Colombian authorities have joined a vigilante group known as Los Pepis, which means people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. Los Pepis carried out a merciless campaign, killing up to 300 people associated with Pablo and his organization. After escaping from La Catedral, Pablo was constantly on the run. Most of his closest companions were dead and his organization was falling apart. He spent the night sleeping in the jungle, afraid to talk on the radio or answer the phone. Fate finally caught up with Pablo Escobar on December 2, 1993. Members of the Colombian search block group tracked him to Los Olivos City in Medellin by wiretapping. The search block team burst through the heavy steel door, causing them to rush into the house. Then the shooting started. In the house with Pablo was his most loyal bodyguard known as Limon. Both boiled out of the hall and onto the roof. The 6 search block members and other outsiders threw a whopping result at their targets. Lamonia was hit several times in the back and fell to the ground. Then Pablo fell. He was hit several times in the leg and torso, but the fatal shot penetrated his skull. Confirming his destination, the head of mission spoke excitedly into the radio. Viva la Colombia! We just killed Pablo Escobar, but were they? Pablo always told his family that if he was cornered, he would kill himself by putting a bullet in his skull. Many people believe that he did it again while fleeing the clutches of the Colombian authorities. Some of the information may be wrong in this video. We change one of the names in this video for copyright reasons. I hope you enjoy the video. Make sure to like and subscribe. See you next time.